Hi everyone, and welcome to Innovating for Good, the monthly series brought to you by UNHCR Innovation and Plus SocialGood. I'm Jackie Strecker, the Learn Lab Manager at UNHCR Innovation, and I'm actually joining you live from the World Education Forum in South Korea. More than a buzzword, innovation has become a necessity in the humanitarian sector. And by innovation here, we're talking about more than just technology. Innovation in the humanitarian sector is about being adaptive so that we can effectively address new challenges. It's also about finding new, creative, and sustainable ways to solve our biggest problems. Innovating for Good wants to have a dialogue about how innovation can impact humanitarian work. Last month, we looked at designs for alternative shelters for people who have been displaced by conflict or disaster, and how to take those designs from prototypes to production. Now today, we'll be talking about education in emergencies and how we can provide quality education experiences to children and young people who are displaced. Before I introduce the panelists, I want to let you know that we'll be taking questions. So at any time during the Hangout, either tweet us your question through the hashtag #InnovateForGood, that's hashtag INNOV, the number 4, and good, or through the Q&A tool on the Hangout page. Be sure to include the hashtags on Twitter so we can make sure that we see your tweet. Now with us today, we are joined by Melissa Fleming, Chief of Communications and Spokesperson for UNHCR, Juan Pablo Geraldo, Education Specialist and Innovations in Education at UNICEF, Olivia Sullivan, Innovation Analyst at DFID, and Choma Ome, Challenge Manager at Amplify, IDEO.org's Open Innovation Challenge program that seeks solutions to some of the world's most pressing problems. Right now, the Amplify program is seeking ideas on how we can improve education and expand learning opportunities for refugees around the world, which brings us to today's topic. Now, Melissa, I want to start off with you. I know you don't have too much time to join with us today, but I really wanted you to put into context this challenge. Last October, you gave a TED Talk on helping refugees not just to survive, but to thrive. And you shared a bit about some of your experiences working with young refugees that you've encountered on your various missions. Can you share with us a little bit more about the refugee children that you meet and why you think education is so important to them?
Yeah, well, I think education is absolutely critical. It's not only just from a humanitarian point of view. We're talking about children who've just fled a war zone. They are traumatized, and they're finding themselves in a foreign country. Putting them in school is putting them in a protective space, a place where they can heal, a place where they can rebuild their lives and look to the future instead of thinking of the horrors and the nightmares of their past. They can make friends with other children, integrate into the community. And what's really important is if people were thinking of education in the strategic self-interest of peace, these children could be the future peacemakers of the region, of their country. They could be agents of reconciliation and not revenge. And so I think people don't look at education in the bigger picture. And you have a situation in Lebanon where only 20% of Syrian refugee kids are in school. That's a disgrace. The kids instead, because there's so little funding, are working in the fields for $4 a day or begging on the streets and not going to school. This is an urgent crisis, and it has to do with not only the dignity, the rights of those children, but it has to also do with the peace and development of that troubled region. So that's why I feel so passionate about education for refugees in particular. And, you know, I told the story in my TED Talk about a boy named Hani. He was a boy at the time who fled Syria, and he waited and waited and waited to flee, and the parents waited in the most dangerous circumstances so he could get his high school diploma, because they didn't want to leave the country until he graduated. And when they had to suddenly flee, the first thing he thought of taking, and the only thing, was his high school diploma. Because for him, that represented a chance of a future. And when they got to Lebanon, he sat in a camp, idle, for 2 years, with unfortunately no opportunity to go to university. Luckily, for various reasons, and I think the publicity around him helped, he and his family are about to be resettled to Canada, and he's going to enroll immediately. But what of all of the other children? And this is where we stand today. Education is being neglected.
Thank you so much, Melissa. And I think, what you speak to is so true in the fact that we need to do so much more. I know working with the education unit, education is a top priority for UNHCR, and something that we see as not just providing primary education, but opportunities throughout the education continuum, whether that be early childhood education all the way up to tertiary education opportunities. But it's not without its challenges. And so I wonder if we can turn now to Juan Pablo. And I want to ask you to expand on thinking through education in emergencies. And while it should be one of our top priorities, it isn't always the case, as Melissa noted, where displaced children and youth have access to educational opportunities, and especially to quality educational opportunities. So why is that? And what are some of the biggest challenges in ensuring that displaced children have these opportunities, particularly in emergencies?
Thank you, Jackie. I really like that in your question you said quality educational opportunities, because definitely, as Melissa just said, in emergencies, there's no quality without access, and 58 million children around the world of primary age are outside of a school, have no access to a school. Around half of them live in conflict-affected countries. So we're talking at 28 million, more or less, children of primary age out of a school, and that's a huge problem. Definitely, as Melissa also said, there's a problem of lack of resources. But the issue of quality is not only resolved with access. In the world right now, around half of the 250 million children who do not know how to count or read by grade 4 are actually attending a school. So if we actually think of people in our countries, I'm from Colombia, but in your countries who are actually attending a school and by grade 4 do not know how to read or count, then we know that something has to happen in a school for learning to be a reality. And that's also and that's compounded in a very, very intense experience for children in emergencies. So I think going back to actually what's the difference in a short-term emergency, what are the challenges in a short-term emergency, and what are the challenges on a protracted emergency, because I think those are two different set of challenges. In a short-term emergency, I think the issue of, and it's actually one of the milestones when you're in early recovery and response, is reopening schools. As Melissa just said, reopening a school is reopening a place where children can sustain their lives. It brings a sense of structure, a sense of normalcy, and that's a huge challenge, reopening schools. When you have conflict affected or man-made crisis, then the issue of safety at schools before reopening and during reopening, it's one of the biggest challenges. Then in protracted emergencies, and I would like the innovators who are actually our audience, I would like them to think in people who are marginalized in their own communities. A protracted crisis tend to intensify the previous communities that had suffered and been marginalized previously, they tend to suffer more in short-term and protracted crisis. We're talking about girls, we're talking about people with disabilities. Uh, so thinking of your own community, how would you respond to the most marginalized children and how they can access a school and have quality experiences would be really helpful for the Amplified Challenge and for your ideas. Some of the issues that really resonate with protracted emergencies is the issues of language. Being taught in your mother tongue, it's a human right, and unfortunately there are not enough teachers trained and supported to provide support, that education. Issues of curriculum, as Melissa just mentioned, uh, who what kind of curriculum am I going to learn as a refugee or as an internally displaced people? And if I learn something, who can certify it? The issue of certification in the long-term recovery and sense of normalcy for these populations is very important. Open learning systems can offer opportunities to learn, but the issue of how do we certify that I actually have a high school diploma or a middle school diploma or an elementary diploma and that I can progress through my education is very important. So I'll leave it there. I think we'll have more questions about this later on, but I think that's a good start.
Wonderful. I agree, Juan Pablo. And I think outlining the challenges is so important, especially as we think through the Amplify program. And so I'd like to actually turn it over to Olivia now. And DFID has committed funding for the Amplify program, which indicates that the agency sees the importance of open innovation for solving humanitarian challenges. In light of the challenges that Juan Pablo just described, how do you see open innovation in playing a key role in expanding educational opportunities for refugees and displaced children and youth?
Thank you, Jackie. And thank you, Juan Pablo and Melissa, for your earlier answers, which I think really helped highlight why this is such an urgent issue and why there are so many kind of different challenges, even potentially unexpected challenges that we need to address. We see open innovation playing a role in this area, because it's a process that enables us to bring fresh perspectives and ideas to some of the most tough and difficult problems, seeing what we can get if we ask people around the world who maybe don't see themselves as traditional humanitarian actors or traditional problem solvers in this space to work with people who do understand the context well to bring bold and effective new approaches to bear. And in education for refugees and displaced people in particular, we know, as Juan Pablo outlined, that there are a huge number of challenges, but our assumption and our hope is that there are also a huge number of opportunities. We know that in the education space in general, there's a lot of innovation happening. Technology is really rapidly changing the education sector. There are any number of creative new programs and initiatives in countries across the world that don't use technology, but that are doing things like challenging our very understanding of what a school looks like, or figuring out how to work with classrooms full of children who have different mother tongues, which is a situation that can be the case in the west coast of America, for example, as well as the west coast of Ethiopia. So we know that education is changing, and we know that there's a lot of innovation in that space. And what we want to do is figure out if we can facilitate a way to get that innovation and that new thinking kind of injected into this really urgent issue of education for people affected by emergencies and people displaced by emergencies. And one of the benefits of the open innovation approach is that it can help bring those non-traditional actors into the problem-solving process. So you might be a person who really understands well educational innovation and modern approaches to education, or you might be a person who really understands well how you bring technology to people in very remote areas, or understands very well how you help a community overcome trauma in a very low resource environment, but you haven't understood how you could be helpful in this particular area before. So with a very simple online process where proposals are visible to all applicants, where teams can collaborate if they wish to, where anyone can join. We're hoping that we can enable people like that to be helpful to our more traditional partners who carry this, so far have carried this huge burden of the very, very challenging issue how to provide education for refugees and displaced people. So as DFID, as a donor, we see our role as being a better facilitator of those connections. What we're doing with the Amplify programme overall is having actually 10 open innovation challenges across 5 years. We're really hopeful that this challenge, which is the third in a series, can prove some of our assumptions about how we can use open innovation to really bring new approaches, effective approaches, bold approaches to something that's a tough problem. And just to wrap up my answer, I wanted to add that when we started out this project, a small team from the Amplify programme, with the help of UNICEF and UNHCR, did some initial research where we talked with refugees and field level staff in Uganda and Ethiopia. And I was personally quite cautious about that because we're taking a very new approach and we're using an online platform. It's quite different from how we've previously looked at problems in this space before, but we were really gratified by the response. In talking with refugees in classrooms and talking with teachers in camps, they really kind of came on board with the idea that when we have limited resources and limited funding, we have to be creative about who we bring in to solve problems, and that there might be people all over the world who have something to offer to this issue. And also that by working with our partners, IDEO.org, we can work with communities to carefully prototype new approaches. So we make sure they're grounded in context, and we make sure we get the very best iteration of a new idea that we can by working directly with people who are affected by the problem. So I would say that's kind of DFID's perspective on why we want to use an open innovation approach to this issue.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Olivia. And I'd like to open this up to the other panelists to get your opinions on what the advantage is of open innovation versus more traditional problem-solving approaches. And do you see one approach being better than the other, or is it ideal to have multiple approaches working in tandem? Melissa, I'll go first to you if you've got a response to this. Oh, I'll just ask you to unmute your mic, if you don't mind.
Yes, of course. Well, it's obvious that the traditional solutions aren't working, or at least they're not enough. And I have to say, you know, following my TED Talk, which was on education, I had this outpouring of support from people from the innovator community around the world writing to me saying, how can I help? And these were people with some of the best minds from Silicon Valley and India and other places. I want to contribute to refugee education. Help me to do that. So I think this is a fantastic opportunity to be able to build bridges between people who genuinely want to help our innovators and also the innovations that already exist, to find low-cost ways that can be adaptable to different situations. I think that's a key word because every situation is different. There are some fundamentals that are true for all, but certainly I think there are ways to connect refugees to the outside world to enable education possibilities that don't exist locally, that could potentially be accredited, and to have all the same, you know, similar kinds of effects of giving people who've suffered so much hope for their future, people who've lost everything in their past, a chance to move on, to move forward, and, you know, let's ask the world to help us. I do think there's a lot of will out there, and it's very inspiring.
Great, thank you so much. And Juan Pablo, what's your perspective on the open innovation process?
And just to say, I'm really sorry, but I have to go. I think this is fascinating, but say thanks to everyone out there, and thanks to you, Jackie. And you should mention you're also at the World Education Summit. You said you're in Korea, but I think it'd be good for everybody to hear a little bit about what's happening there. And thanks to DFID, thanks to UNICEF, fantastic partners and leaders in the education sector. So, and to the UN Foundation, of course, for all the support. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Answering your question, Jackie, I think there are two key issues that really make open innovation a very promising approach for this issue. The first one is something that Melissa touched on, and that I would really like our innovators to think about, is that people in refugee camps are people with assets, with culture, with an outlook of life that was disrupted by external forces, but who have a life plan, and that life plan might need to change, but they are agents and active participants of their change. So the open innovation approach opens a door for them to participate in their solutions, and I think that's really, really powerful. The other key issue that I think it's also related to the way technology and other sectors deal with challenges, and sometimes intractable challenges, is that in our field sometimes we take too long to refine programs. The cycle to wait for a 5 or 6 year evaluation and then change a program, that's too long for the situations we're dealing with. And open innovations calls for iterative and continuous improvement, and I think that's going to be a really, really powerful and key component of the Amplified Challenge, and overall the open innovation approach for this and other important problems in the development agenda.
Thank you, Juan Pablo, and I think those are really important points to highlight. I want to go to Choma now, who manages the Amplify program. Choma, you're still accepting ideas for the Refugee Challenge, correct? And how's the process going? What are some of the innovative ideas that you've seen so far?
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. I'm happy to talk a little bit about what's happening in our challenge. So we are soliciting ideas from people around the world, and it's already been suggested by other panelists that we are looking for everybody to contribute, to put an idea into the challenge about how we can work together to solve a problem, or at least contribute to solving a problem that's a really pressing issue on a global scale. When it comes to innovation, I wanted to echo a few things that Liv and Juan Pablo said about the process that we're using, just to frame it for people who are thinking of participating. When we talk about innovation on the Amplify challenges, we're really looking at the things that they suggested, which is having an approach from another industry or sector or your own experience that can inspire and spark something new, and also looking at it through the lens of human-centered design, which is really looking at problems at their root, at the people who, as Juan Pablo just so eloquently said, are agents of their own lives. So developing and designing things around their needs and their skills and opportunities. And when he said that, it really made me think about some of the ideas that have come into the challenge already. So, for example, when it comes to agency, somebody has a friend who's in Jordan working in one of the refugee camps in Jordan for Syrian refugees. And their friend was saying they're managing logistics in the camp, and there's just so many things that have to be taken into account. And the person who's a friend of theirs thought, wait a second, there's also so many human assets and resources that are in the camp, and how are those being accounted for? So their proposition in the challenge is to come up with an idea of mapping that human potential. And in fact, in the challenge, we've had a lot of ideas that really center around that. What is it that communities are able to offer each other, both themselves as refugees and also to the communities that they live in? So there are suggestions for programs where refugees teach each other and then also teach members of their community for money so they're able to sustain their programming. We've had some urban solutions proposed to us where people have suggested that there'll be community centers that are really fueled by the community entirely and also given access to additional resources as the community coalesces around them, rather than just starting a center born out of thinking what people need, actually having the community be active participants in developing out something. When it comes to approaches that have been tried in other sectors and then looking through the lens of education for refugees, one of the ones that comes to mind that's in the challenge so far relates to radio. So we've seen that being used in the agricultural sector. Well, there will be educational programming on the radio, and then there'll be a touch point in the community or an educator who will come by and explain how education works in the agricultural sector. But we've actually seen that in the challenge, people suggesting that happens in vocational training for refugees. So recognizing that there's a lack of resources, how is it that they could more effectively deliver vocational training with a touch point and a teacher, but also gathering community around via the radio. So as you can see, there are lots of different things that are happening in the challenge, really mainly driven by the idea that refugees are people who have assets and things to contribute both to each other and the communities that they live in, and then ways that they can be supported in unlocking the potential that they have. So we are looking for ideas really widely, and we do have our challenge open until June 2nd, so we're really hoping that people will contribute in the next couple of weeks and also join a conversation. There's a lot of interesting conversations that are happening between people who are professionals in the field, people who are just interested in learning more about the refugee experience, educators from around the world. So it really is an opportunity not just to put your idea into a challenge and maybe win some money and some support from us here at IDEO.org, but also to be inspired and connect with people who are working on the same challenges that you are.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Shoma. And I think it's really important that you emphasize the dialogue, because I think that's a really important element of the Amplify Challenge too, in bringing together a community that can really discuss. And so I'd also like to encourage everyone, if you do have questions that you'd like for us to table during this Hangout, please feel free to tweet them or send them along through the Google Hangout. I have one question that I'd like to pose to the panel that's come through Twitter. And it says, girls remain at a disadvantage when accessing education. How do you confront these challenges in emergency settings? So I'll turn this over to the different panelists for some of your ideas or some of the ideas that you've seen on the platform. Shoma, why don't we start with you?
Sorry, just unmuting my microphone. So in our challenge, one of the things that we have to set out the challenge is design principles. And I'm glad that you brought this one up, because this is a really key one, that girls consistently are a disadvantage, and we want to design with the needs of the disadvantaged, particularly women and girls, in mind. When it comes to what's been happening in our challenge, we've definitely seen some ideas that really focus on the role of women in their communities. So for example, there's one where women are being trained in early childhood education and then training other women and then actually organizing early childhood education within their homes. So both as a means of empowerment and also as a means of potentially some income generation. Another thing that we've seen coming out of the Syrian refugee crisis also, so this is an idea in Jordan, we've seen somebody suggest some civic empowerment and engagement ideas for training for young girls and teenagers on how to become more confident, more self-aware, and also more aware of their role in politics and civic engagement. So that's been really interesting too. It's certainly an issue that we care a lot about and we want to emphasize a lot, and we are looking for more ideas that really call that out. And in fact, we're looking for all of our ideas to acknowledge that and think about ways that we can even the scales.
Wonderful, thank you. Juan Pablo, what are your thoughts? I know girls and women and children are very close to UNICEF's mandate. What are you thinking with regards to some of the ideas you've seen on the platform, but also in UNICEF's approach to really making sure we have inclusive education?
Absolutely. I think one of the, particularly for girls and women, one of the first issues you have to confront in emergency situations is safety at schools. Women and children, but women and girls are particularly targeted in violent contexts. So by making the school a safe environment, a non-militarized environment, that's I would say the first measure that you will have to take, and it's taken as part of our protocol, really. And then there are additional measures that you can take. For example, I'm going to tell you only two maybe. The first one is the training and the support of women as teachers and facilitators of the learning environment. That has powerful effects on children of both genders to see the leadership role that women are playing and will play when their communities return to normalcy. And the second one I would say is really life skills education, which is not necessarily does not necessarily prioritize girls, but prioritize teenagers of both genders to learn skills that they can use once they hopefully will return to the job market. And those skills are not necessarily specific to a gender, but it's important that both girls and boys of teenage a teenage age can access those resources in both in temporary learning spaces and in more permanent spaces in protracted emergencies. That's it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Juan Pablo. And I think you've done a good job to outline also thinking through the safety of schools and protective spaces and the protection element that education also brings to the fore in these contexts. Liv, what are your thoughts around girls and education and how we can really ensure inclusive opportunities?
Thanks, Jackie. Well, I think Choma and Juan Pablo have outlined a lot of the most important issues, but I would echo that the importance of not just recruiting but supporting female teachers came out so much in our research around this challenge. It's something I would urge people to do who haven't already gone to openideo.com and looked at the challenge, is to have a look at the introductory video that IDEO.org put together about this issue, because there's a fantastic example of a really inspiring female teacher who works in a refugee camp on that. But sadly, she's one of a few. The number of female teachers in schools is very low compared with the number of men. And in particular, it's difficult for girls to continue in schools when they're under pressure from communities to marry early or to leave school in favour of boys, to stick around if there isn't a strong role model there, like a female teacher. So creative or new or in any way kind of more effective ways to support female teachers in schools, whether that's thinking about what a school is differently, whether that's thinking about how we value female teachers and how we support them and we help them build networks. Any of those kind of aspects are really important issues and great contributions to the challenge. More broadly, the kind of what's great about this challenge is that the question of it, as well as the process. So there are lots of ways of improving or helping girls develop skills outside of a school setting. And I think one thing that came up a lot when we researched this issue and also in the conversation on the challenge is that people, when people propose kind of vocational skills and life skills and programs for youth, it's really important that they are always aware that youth is not a byword for young boys, and teenage girls and girls who are kind of moving into secondary education. It's really important to prioritise them because they're far more likely to drop out before they get to that stage. And it can really help and uplift the entire community if they have ways of supporting themselves. So I would just to emphasise a couple more of the important issues around women and girls in education on this question.
Excellent, thank you so much. And I think that the three of you did an excellent job at identifying the main concerns that we have as agencies and humanitarian actors, and also the incredible opportunities we have when we do invest in girls' education. Liv, you mentioned the process, and we have one more question here that focuses on how we're actually engaging refugees into the challenge. And so, Choma, I want to go to you first, and if you could identify, the ways that IDEO.org is actually encouraging dialogue with communities throughout the challenge, not just in this current phase and in the research phase, but throughout the challenge process.
Yeah, thank you. So, as I mentioned before, human-centered design is really about the heart of the people who are involved and the people who are the beneficiaries of the services and products and projects that we're all working to devise. And as Liv mentioned, we did some research in advance of the challenge. We were in Ethiopia and Uganda, and we talked with field staff at UNICEF and UNHCR. We also spoke with refugees, teachers, community members, people in urban areas who are working on community-based projects, not to get a definitive sense of what the context is, but to get ourselves immersed a bit in what some of those main needs and challenges are. And from there, we built our challenge and introduced the topics to the community that we're discussing today. And we've tried to keep refugees at the heart of the process. And there's a couple of ways that we see that happening. So clearly we're running an open innovation challenge on an internet platform. So there are logistical challenges with the idea of engaging refugees directly. And we recognize that. So one of the primary ways that we hope to do this is by engaging implementing and operating partners of the United Nations agencies and also community organizations and NGOs that work with refugee communities themselves. One of the things that we see over and over in our work is that people who work as field staff or work with communities directly often have a lot of depth of information and understanding about the needs of those communities, and they have access. And a lot of times they might not have the resources to put an idea that's kind of in the back of their head that they think would be really exciting, but maybe there's not any proof it might work, for example, or interest in the donor community. But they have that firsthand knowledge. So what we're hoping to do is tap into those ideas and give them the support through our design support, through our process online, to help them grow that idea. And as Juan Pablo said earlier, iterate faster. So come up with your idea, test some of your key assumptions, and keep going. So move faster and faster through the process so you get to a better idea sooner. So that's one way, is actually engaging people who work in those communities and helping them develop their ideas. But the second way that we're engaging refugees throughout the process involves an initiative that we're trying in Kakuma. So Kakuma is a refugee camp in Kenya, and we have some people in that camp who are trained as interpreters, so through a program that's run through Jesuit Refugee Services. And the program that we have is called InZone. So it's not our program, it's a program we're collaborating with. And the people who are part of that InZone project are actually working in their communities in Kakuma, the refugees themselves, and they're participating in the challenge. So they've been holding workshops, they've been doing prototyping in their communities, asking questions of people in their communities. They've served as a resource in our challenge, so they've put a number of entries into our research phase, which is the beginning phase of our challenge, explaining their context and their experience. They are online actively, so if you send a message to them, they'll write back. You can find all of them in our blog, so if you go onto openideo.com and you look on the blog under Amplify, you'll find all of the connections to each of those community connectors. It's really exciting to have them engaged on our platform, and it's also created some really interesting collaborations. So for example, we have a group in the UK that has an idea about creating a community resource wall. And then the community champions of Kakuma had saw that and said, hey, we'd like to try that in the camp ourselves in our community. So those two groups are having a discussion online about how they can test the idea. So not only is it an excellent example of how we're engaging refugees in the process, in the fortunate instance that we've been able to make those connections, but also how they're part of the conversation with our broader community. So it's really exciting.
Wonderful. I think that's a fantastic and concrete example of how really these dialogues come to the fore, and all of the incredible work that you've been doing, both with InZone, with JRS, with FilmAid, and a range of different partners in Kakuma to really make sure refugees are part of the conversations and are leading on sourcing ideas and helping with iterate some of the solutions that are coming onto the platform. We have another statement on Twitter, and it says, let's move the emphasis away, let's move away from emphasis on refugee trauma and more on education as portable assets and changing refugee label viewed as a burden. I think this is a really, really interesting thought and really speaks to the opportunity that education provides. Juan Pablo, what are your thoughts on how we can really move away from this iconic and somewhat historic reference of refugees being a burden and really see them, as you mentioned before, as agents of change?
Thank you. I think I think, Jackie, that's a huge challenge, and we're already taking some measures for that. The first one actually is, how do you innovatively enable empathy towards populations and community that you may not, which was you may not have a family or a heritage in common with them. How do you do that? The Millennium Campaign by the United Nations recently shot a film called Clouds Over Sidra. It's a virtual reality film. You can watch it in a very expensive device, or you can watch it with a Google Cardboard. It only takes 7 minutes, and the technology puts you in the middle of a girl, a Syrian refugee girl, and for 7 minutes you can share her experience and create empathy. Because I think there might be policy solutions, there might be programmatic solutions, but one of the most important, I think, interventions that we can do as an innovative community is create opportunities and outlets for empathy. How am I similar to this person? How this context of recent displacement, being outside of your country or in your country. I come from a country with millions of people who have been internally displaced. How do you change that conversation and maybe think of your family? Did they immigrate or emigrate from a country and now they find themselves, or 3 generations ago, they found themselves in a different environment? How did they cope with that? How am I similar to them? And I think that empathy approach is very, very important for the actions we want to take and for the ideas we want to contribute to the challenge.
Thank you, Juan Pablo. I agree. I think empathy is very important. And I would just like to add that I do think the interactions that the Amplify Challenge also provides to allow people all over the world to interact together is another opportunity, as you said, to stimulate empathy and understanding, and also conversations on the challenges people are concretely facing on the ground, but also, as you know, the statement from Twitter said, looking at them as assets and opportunities. And so really seeing how we can move away from some of these previous notions of burden, and really see how refugees can contribute also to host communities and to the greater communities that they reside within. And I think, you know, this is an incredible opportunity for all of you out there to also join in the conversation and to work with these communities on the ground to really look at how we can work together in solving and creating some of these solutions. We've got another question here, which is, what are some of the advocacy priorities for education in emergencies? And Liv, I'm going to turn this over first to you. So, advocacy priorities in education and emergencies.
Great, thank you. Sorry, I was just unmuting myself. I think in terms of advocacy, touched a little bit on that issue in the previous answers in the previous statement that we were discussing, which is that we need to see refugees as people who have their own life plans, as Juan Pablo says, and as people who can bring their own skills and assets to any solution that we want to implement. So we have to get away from kind of very, very traditional understanding of both development and humanitarian intervention, which is that something is done to people who are affected by an emergency or a conflict situation. People are actors in their own right, and they have to have ways to participate and advocate for themselves in any solution that we support or implement. So when that comes to education, there's any number of great work that standing UNHCR partners do, which is like always including parent-teacher councils, always including refugee councils in the decisions that we make. But we think there are opportunities for really improving the way that people participate in their own solutions and participate in their own education. There are ways of ensuring that disadvantaged members of communities, maybe even people who in their previous country or previous situations were marginalised, ways that they can come to the fore in a camp setting, ways that we can enable people to have a more equal voice in interventions that we implement. And with what we're doing with Amplify, we're funding in this programme small-scale solutions. We're looking at starting out with new ideas and bringing them to fruition as pilots. But because we're doing that and using a kind of human-centered design methodology, we're always ensuring that there's a constant feedback loop, and that the people that we're working with are able to tell us if what we're implementing isn't working well or isn't addressing problems that it should be addressing, and able to change rapidly rather than investing in a big program upfront that we've developed out of context and without feedback from the people involved. So I'd say overall, the biggest advocacy issue is this point of seeing refugees as participants in their own solutions and agents in their own education in this particular area.
Thank you so much. And I'd just like to add to that too. I think one of the important priorities is looking at making sure that refugees and displaced populations feature on global agendas. And so that's also part of the reason why we're here at the World Education Forum as co-conveners. UNHCR and UNICEF are both co-conveners. And we're delighted to see that with the new declaration for education moving towards 2030, and the framework for education, that refugees and displaced populations are featured, and that states also recognize their role in incorporating and planning for displaced populations. So I think on both levels, it's really important that we see refugees as agents for change, as Liv mentioned, but we also look at the global level in making sure that these populations are quite visible within global declarations and as we move forward. And I'd just like to
add,
please go ahead.
Well, just to add to your great point there, on the advocacy issue, we've often found in the past that in responding to humanitarian emergencies, donors like DFID and across the donor community are not always good at making that transition from a humanitarian crisis to a protracted emergency and into a kind of more traditional development situation work well. So advocating for education as an issue in humanitarian response and in protracted emergencies response is really important because it can get lost. We know it's a huge priority for partners that we work with, but we don't always fund humanitarian crises in a way that enables that to come to the fore. We prioritise immediate responses, but we need to think long term about what's best for refugee communities. So another important advocacy point is to see education itself as an emergency issue.
Jackie,
yes, Pablo,
I would like to chip in also on this one, because maybe something we had been missing in the conversation, and that is important for advocacy, is actually what happens before the emergency, being that man-made or a natural disaster, well, caused by natural disasters. One of I think advocacy priorities is preparedness with national governments and international agencies and partners on the ground. When you know then you need to have a plan in place, and you need to have special emergency funds at national, regional, and global level. Those funds need resources, but there's also work to be done. I think there might be examples recently from the earthquake in Nepal where children actually knew that they had to have a whistle at hand in case of an earthquake. Those simple measures really improve your hopes of early response and of rebuilding really your systems, not just in education.
I think that's a great point, and also another opportunity for us to think through innovative approaches. And so if any of you out there have creative ideas of thinking through from the preparation side, how we can make sure that education is available at the onset of an emergency and how we can prepare the ground, please go onto the Amplify platform and share your thoughts. I'm going to say, unfortunately, we've reached the end of today's Hangout, but I'd like to thank all of the experts for joining us today, and for all of you for watching this month's episode of Innovating for Good on Education in Emergencies. As Choma mentioned, Amplify's Refugee Education Challenge is still accepting ideas. So if you have an innovative idea on how we can expand learning opportunities for refugees, you have until June 2nd to share your ideas at openideorefugee-education.com. Once again, that's openideorefugee-education.com. And we are tweeting that link now from @UNHCR Innovation. So I want to turn it over for any last words from the panelists. Liv, we'll start with you.
Great. Well, just to say thank you, Jackie, for moderating, and thanks to everyone who sent questions and watched. And just to reiterate that the challenge is still open, and that part of making this a more accessible process for anyone who has a good idea to contribute is that you don't have to have as developed an idea as you might expect in a traditional funding proposal. So even if it's something that you feel is a little bit underdeveloped but you want to develop it further, you can do that by proposing your idea and interacting on the platform with other experts and with IDEO.org and our partners UNICEF and UNHCR. Who, even if they feel it's a small kernel of an idea, bring it to the platform and see what it can develop into. And yeah, thanks again to everyone for participating.
Wonderful, thanks, Liv. Juan Pablo?
I would also like to reiterate to everyone participating in the challenge, surprise us. Also comment on other people's ideas. That conversation, getting that conversation going is really valuable. And thank you, Jackie, for this opportunity. And hopefully we'll have more outlets to have these conversations. Bye.
Great. And Choma, any final words?
Well, Juan Pablo and Olivia did a great job of summarizing many of the things I'd like to say, but again, it's until June 2nd, so June 2 that we have the challenge open. Please put on any idea that you have. You never know when you might inspire someone else towards a great idea that they'll have also. It takes about 15 minutes to put an idea up on the challenge, so really simple. And as we move through the next process of the challenge, we'll also be working a lot with experts and engaging people who are refugees themselves to give feedback on the ideas and to help move them further towards being real. So really, we encourage you to send your good ideas our way. We look forward to having a conversation with you. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out and email us, and we'll be happy to help you along.
Excellent. Well, thank you again to all of the experts and to all of you for watching. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks for joining us. Bye.